Welcome to... Where are we?
What were we doing? What's the topic?
Mom?
Get 1,000 gamers in the room, and 1,000 of them are fucking wrong. I forget what the branding is.
1,000 gamers in a room and you're all ugly. Get out.
That room smells terrible.
That is going in the bloopers, probably.
Take that, gamers. Welcome, nerds and virgins.
Yeah, no, we should definitely let Legion do the intro.
Oh, I've got a bone to pick with Banana. A friend of mine, I sent them the podcast link, and you're their favorite. My friend.
Well, I was
not okay.
not prepared for being anyone's favorite anything, especially not one of your friends' favorites. I don't know if I have to apologize for that. Like, I am the same unlikable every episode. I've done nothing to deserve that.
Well, rest assured, you've got a fan. They think you're great.
Well, Beef came into my stream yesterday when I was doing Mass Effect and then pronounced to Banana that I'm her favorite now. Mm-hmm. So he gained one, but he lost one. So
Beef loves anybody who will antagonize me. So obviously Legion is her favorite.
Yeah, I've got to say, well, damn it, I need to change my role a little bit. I want to sweep up these fans.
Yeah, you either need to speak over everybody else like an insufferable prick, or just troll both of us.
Permanent contrarian.
Yeah.
Here's where your logic is flawed. Okay. Example one.
That's an interesting point, but have you considered shutting the up? I just feel like that's going to come out at some point.
Actually, I was going to integrate like certain other things, like what is your favorite controller? You know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, gotcha. The N64 one, because it's fucking impossible to decipher how you're even supposed to hold it.
I was told there would be no fact checking.
Oh, God.
Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome on into another episode of the Gamer's Advocate podcast. I am joined with Com and Banana. Boy, it's been a hefty week for a lot of gaming stuff. I mean, Dragon Age is down the pipe. In fact, it might be out by the time this episode's out. I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. Silent Hill 2 just came out. I'm looking forward to that one. So there's a lot of things going on. What about you, Banana? Let's start there. What have you been playing lately?
I've been bouncing all over the place with a few games. Doing some of those tavern simulator games that Legion loves so much. Playing some Black Myth Wukong, and that game is kicking the crap out of me. And doing some Final Fantasy 16, 16 mixed in there. And then, of course, my go-to of playing a game I've beaten 400 times. Started playing Final Fantasy Tactics again.
Any thoughts on Final Fantasy 16?
So far, one of the things that's really stood out to me is how much that game relies on cutscenes to do a lot of the legwork. And I find it infuriating because so many of the cutscenes they involve the main character not doing things that I would like him to do in all of those situations. And it's just one of those things like, if you're going to handcuff the player by having a cutscene play out where the main character chooses not to get involved, you're doing something wrong with your storytelling. Like, the reason that my character fails should not be because you won't let me play the game. It should either be because the character wasn't there and so could not have an impact on that situation, or because the gameplay made it make sense that it was overwhelming and your character couldn't succeed. And Final Fantasy 16 does a lot of stuff where it's like your character who has superpowers chooses not to use them, and then somebody dies and he's just watching. And it was like, yeah, of course they died. You did nothing. You watched it happen. And that drives me nuts because it's an issue they've done correctly in previous games. Like there are previous Final Fantasy games where they're like, yeah, we can't have cutscenes determine major story events without the player being involved at all, because then the player is just going to be watching, and we're making a game, not a movie. And then the latest entry of the series, they're like, it's a movie.
There were times when I was playing it when it did feel, and I do really, really love that game, when it did feel as though the comparisons to something like Game of Thrones, which it feels a lot like the further you get into the game in tone, it did feel as though, yeah, you were taking part in a TV show. And there were moments when your character's, not incompetence, but unwillingness to do anything felt really hamstringing.
I was talking to somebody as I was playing, like shortly after I had played through kind of the tutorial sequence, and I was just like, so I went through the entire tutorial and I didn't even take a hit. I learned the combat and played it well enough to get through without taking damage. And the end result was exactly the same as if I had been absolutely terrible at the game and got my ass handed to me in every fight, because the end result was it playing out in a cutscene that didn't take into account gameplay at all. And that's not what you want in a tutorial. It's not, here's how to play the game and here's why it doesn't fucking matter.
That's a little quirk actually of mine that really grates me sometimes, is when a game has a tutorial and, for example, you're in a training yard, you're learning how to use your sword, and you're going back and forth with the instructor, and it'll end, for example, with the instructor getting a hit on you, which transitions into a cutscene which shows them hitting you to the ground. You know, get up, we'll get you next time, or whatever. It grates me when on the second playthrough, when I'm good at the game, that there's not an alternative one where you really get to show off, or in your case, on the first try. And yeah, that genius, that odd relationship between what you've just done and the cutscene that follows. It's grating.
Yeah.
Essentially, all the good work that you did was for nothing.
Exactly. It's that fact that it doesn't matter how well I play the game, events are going to play out exactly the same way as if they would while I was terrible at the game. And if that's the case, just make a movie, just make a TV show. Like, the whole point of role-playing games is to have an impact on the events. And if you have to take me out of the game to make the story play out the way you decide it should, just don't make a game. You're telling a story that doesn't need interaction. Just tell that story and use the medium that makes sense for that story.
Tomorrow morning, YouTube video uploaded. BananaHammockRepublic calls for the end of Final Fantasy series. Goes hard on developers.
Yeah. It's like one of my favorite series of all time. And I'm just like, yourselves. That's enough. You guys...
We had a great run.
Minor frustrating error that in judgment you've made on this one game in a series of 400.
In the tutorial.
Enough. It's the nail in the coffin after years of success.
Banana, you said Black Myth Wukong. Is there a boss that maybe you've liked so far, though? Or maybe a favorite one that you've encountered?
The problem is I don't remember anybody's name.
Right.
So there's that first kind of optional boss, the white, and then there's the like golden version of that you fight as like part of the story progression that summons in like kind of aimless zombies that slowly kind of march towards him, and he can convert those into health for himself. And
I call him the big baby because he looks like a big baby. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought that fight was really fun because of that mechanic where, you know, there's a point in the fight where he basically elevates himself above the battlefield and starts summoning in those kind of unimpressive enemies. And it's kind of this race between you and him to absorb the most energy from those that you can. I thought that was a really interesting idea, that like you can also use this ability that he's using to your advantage, and regenerate your own health while kind of limiting how much he can regenerate. I thought that was really cool. That being said, that game's really hard and I hate everything about it. So
I'm on the.
Oh, you're in that phase of playing the game. Okay.
Yeah. I'm at the very last boss, and that's one of those games that like your muscle memory for the controller or however you're playing it. That's actually going to be what we're going to go into here pretty soon, the controller versus keyboard. But however you play, if you're not used to that particular game, I wouldn't say it's, because a lot of Souls games have similar control features, right?
Mhm.
Whereas this one is a little different because it's a dodge first mechanic. So it's different. There is a parry, but it's not a traditional parry. I use it all the time because I love parrying.
You don't get it until
yeah, exactly.
you've played for a few hours.
Yeah. So unless you're playing it regularly, it's really hard to kind of get back into it. And I'm at the end level, so it's not like I have to like spend time just to remember how to play the game. So that's where I'm at.
The one saving grace for me in terms of that kind of gameplay is that the controls for Wukong are almost identical to the controls for Code Vein,
Oh, okay.
which I've played a lot. So it's very familiar. The dodge window is a little tighter in Wukong. Parrying in Code Vein is something I almost never did, but it has a lot of the same kind of gameplay elements in the combat that, get your combo in, learn when your combo is going to take a lot longer versus just adding another quick hit, and then learning when it's time to dodge and take advantage of your openings to either regain stamina, heal, or get another few hits in. So it's all very familiar. It's just not something I ever really mastered.
And the great thing about Wukong is that it's not just dodge. I mean, I did mention the little bit of parry, but there's other forms of stances, which a lot of people hate stances. Games like Ghost of Tsushima use it quite a bit. Shielded versus a heavy enemy or something. Changing between that's really confusing because you don't do it all the time, but that's why Ghost of Tsushima will give you enemies that are a motley crew of different types, and that way you kind of get used to changing it if you need to, but you never really need to. Whereas Wukong, it's one of those that's like, oh, I just changed this because this gives me an advantage here, and it's real easy to change into those stances and take advantage. Even if you have no extra agility points to it, at least gives it to you. So it's pretty nice. What about you, Com? Any games you've been playing recently besides XCOM 2 on our channel?
Well, thanks for taking my thunder. So I've been playing XCOM 2 on our channel, playthrough that you can go and watch now. There is a playlist that I'm keeping all the videos in, and you can come and join in. See how well we're doing on that. I've been playing XCOM 2 on stream. I've been playing XCOM 1 off stream. This is actually where the idea to suddenly get back in and play XCOM 2 came from. I wanted to go back and try the parts of those games that I've never done. So generally, I haven't done the DLCs for those two games. I played XCOM when it came out, didn't play the DLC. Played XCOM 2 when it came out, didn't play the DLC. So I'm taking the chance to sort of fill in that gap and play those things I missed out on. And it's amazing how much they did, how much they changed. They really decided to have fun with the mechanics. Bringing in XCOM 1, it's a very, very slow-paced game. You tend to have a tendency to march slightly forward. Everyone then, so if you move your unit forward 6 tiles, you're going to move all the others forward 5 afterwards, just to make sure you don't activate any enemies, and then everyone goes on Overwatch, just in case. And we repeat, and we repeat, and we repeat. And they saw the gamers doing that, and came up with a mechanic that would stop you. You now have to get in there quickly to collect this resource, only available on the battlefield, which you can use to make psychic soldiers, which you can use to make big robotic soldiers. But you have to get there quick, because it expires in 6 turns, in 4 turns. I think the longest is about 10 turns. So you have to get through the game. So it's been really interesting seeing how they altered the way that you play. And then XCOM 2, I've started, and it's nice to see them adding in story elements, which you don't tend to have in games like this. The thing we discussed on the stream is that a lot of the stories you get in XCOM are your own stories that you make. It's when you name a character after your friend, and then they make that really clutch kill in the escape, or your one friend who doesn't quite make it out, and those are the stories. But now they actually have a narrative with these cutscenes and interesting characters. I think that's a nice path to take. So that's been the bulk of my gaming. The other has been my newfound addiction to Tetrio, Tetr.io, which is a competitive online Tetris game. You're typically playing with about 1,000 people at any one time, and you're racing to climb a tower. The way you climb the tower is by playing Tetris. And it is outstanding. I recommend anyone go and give that a try. It is free to play, and it's an absolutely brilliant game. Don't be worried when you're terrible at it. Hasn't for me yet, but that will slowly change. It's a hard game, it's a difficult game, but it's a really, really fun game. Tetr.io, I recommend it.
Yeah, we can put it in the description for the video. It's not a problem. But today, we're going to go over controllers
we're
versus...
not going to talk about the games that Legion
Apparently
is
not.
playing?
Nope.
Think you're better than us?
Well, let's go down
Down
the
with
list.
Legion. Down with Legion.
I don't know why, but like when you hesitated to respond there, I thought you were just gonna be like, yeah, I think I'm better than you.
I mean, I could go over it. I mean, there's been at least 6 of them that I'm playing right now. So
You just beat Mass Effect 1 for the first time on
yeah, for the
stream.
very first time I beat Mass Effect 1. I finally have more than 5 hours in that game. Finally.
It's up to 15.
I went ahead and just tried it on Insanity. It was super easy. So I just did it that way. Yeah, the game's a cakewalk. I did it on level 1 armor until like Vermeer 2. So, whatever. It's easy. Let's see. That Traveler's Rest game that I mentioned, I think on a previous episode, I love that game. It's so focused on making a good tavern, but you can actually make a garden, you can have a barn, you can go fishing, you have like these little people that you talk to that have their own like little quests, and they keep adding stuff to it. They have these like little tabs saying coming soon, so there's going to be a plethora of other things. So what I like about that game over like say Stardew or Graveyard Keeper is it's the same aesthetic, but it seems to have a much more focused gameplay into it, and yet you can deviate from it because it's not so myopic about how you have to do things. The tavern itself can be on autopilot after a while. Once you start, have it be a certain level, then you can hire employees and they can do a lot of stuff for you. They do take breaks and stuff, so it keeps you on your toes. But you can hire out or you can rent out the rooms, and then you can build add-ons to your tavern. And it's just this whole opening of the game that after a while, it never gets truly boring. I'm pretty sure that there's an endpoint because it's not really a finished game yet. It's still in early access, but there's a ton of content there. And that's easy one to kind of like get in there and cozy up to, because it even has its own seasons. So some crops grow better in some seasons than others. So, and so you can, if you're good at fishing, you can get all this fish in advance before winter comes, and you have it in reserves. And there's all these like just little things that you wouldn't think of that are so immersive for a pixelated game. That's really amazing to me. But yeah, I finished Mass Effect, been playing Traveler's Rest. I'm going to be playing Silent Hill soon. Yeah, I don't know. It's a ton of stuff. Like Myth Wukong. But yeah, but like I said, today what we're going to be going over is mouse and keyboard versus controllers. A lot of people have their preferences. I'm definitely one of those. I grew up on a controller, the Nintendo, things like that. But I actually started off with mouse and keyboard first. Well, actually, keyboard only first, because the stuff I had predates Windows. I had a Tandy, which was like an IBM type clone back in the day, but this is before Windows and stuff. So the games that I played on that had like, they would be on the cassette deck and things, but I was used to playing on a keyboard is my point. I type in my controls or my what to do, left, right, up, down, whatever. And some of those text-based games that were on computer. So I grew up on that, but I don't hate controller at all. I mean, it's just the format for obviously a console game, so you only have the choice to use a controller. But my understanding of a controller was A, B, select, start, up, down, left, right, the D-pad. That's all I knew. That Nintendo pad. It was super simple. And then when the things like Super Nintendo came around, I'm like, there's all these extra buttons. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to hit the wrong button by accident. And I was just no good at it. I had to be good at it because I wanted to play Super Metroid. I had to play Super Metroid. So I learned it for Metroid. But then beyond that, once they got into 64 and a bunch of other things, I got lost. And it wasn't until very recently that I started kind of getting back into controller for some games, because things like God of War, I just absolutely love. And I have to play on controller for that. I did the first God of War on PC, the 2018 one, on mouse and keyboard. It's hard as hell, but I did it. But yeah, I'm a mouse and keyboard truther. But I have nothing against controllers. It's just my preference. When a game actually is optimized for mouse and keyboard, I generally will do that. I still play Mass Effect, mouse and keyboard. That's my preference. But how about you, Banana?
Well, I think the type of game you're playing really determines which mode of control is most appropriate. For like most platforming games, I would say mouse and keyboard is rough. I'd much prefer mouse and keyboard for something like a shooter or any game that requires that kind of quick field of view control. Whereas movement in a game is more, I think, intuitive on a controller. Just you have the analog sticks, you have that kind of continuous range of motion, whereas on mouse and keyboard it's typically you have, forward, back, left, and right. Maybe you have diagonal directions, but it's mostly about controlling the direction you're facing with that kind of analog control, and then using those discrete controls to move in one of four directions. So for me, if a game requires a lot of precise movement, I want a controller. But if a game requires a lot of quick turning, a lot of precision targeting, I want mouse and keyboard. That being said, there are games that are, I think, most optimized for mouse and keyboard that I've been playing. For example, Baldur's Gate 3, I play primarily on my desktop, but it works on Steam Deck pretty well. And it's a very different control scheme on Steam Deck, but I think they did a really good job porting it and making it work. It's a bit slower, I would say, but it's very playable. It works well.
Yeah, for a turn-based game, I think I could see how that could work.
Yeah, for me, I'm more of a controller player. I don't enjoy playing a game with mouse and keyboard, and I think it's a psychology issue. So if you think of mouse and keyboard, I think it's hard to make an argument against that being more flexible. And if you're looking for flexibility, I guess mouse and keyboard is just superior. The sheer amount of access that you have, the reactivity of the mouse when you're trying to play things like first-person shooters. But I game to relax. I game for fun. I game to sit back on the couch. And I've yet to find a way that sitting back on the couch, even with a wireless keyboard, even with a wireless mouse, I've yet to find a way that feels good. Never. You try to get it perched, get it relaxed. And I want to be able to sit like this one moment. Then I want to be here. I want to be there. I want to put auto rotate on my body and just like keep moving around. And you can't do that with the mouse and keyboard. But the controller, perfect. And this is where the Switch controller was incredible. That I never played with the Switch, or two little controllers. I never played with them stuck together. It was always independent, one in each hand. You can absolutely rot on your couch with one arm down by your side, the other kind of up here, and just play like that. That's what gaming is to me. It's there to be relaxing. It's there to be fun. And I think the second point, which follows on from that, is, I don't know about you all, but when I work, typically I work from home, and I work on the same device that I game on. So if I'm playing on the computer, the PC, I don't have two. It's very hard to make that distinction between gaming time and work time if I'm sat at the computer using the exact same peripherals. If I've got that same mouse, that same keyboard, all of a sudden it's tempting to open up those emails again. All of a sudden it's hard to turn off that switch. I think of it as a bit like in sort of deep COVID, when we were really in our lockdown phases and almost everyone was working from home if they could. A lot of us were told, don't put your workspace in the bedroom, for example, if you can avoid it. Have it somewhere where you can close that door when you're done and that day is done. Because when you can see that computer, that work instinct starts to kick in a little bit. For me, it's a bit the same feeling. Never take the work computer in the bedroom. The bedroom's for two things. It's for sleeping and bedroom cardio. That's all. Yeah. All banana, stop it. Trying to keep that psychological distinction between the two is very important for me, so I game on a controller because it helps it feel more like gaming. There are times you can't, and this is those multiplayer games. I think if you're playing a shooter online, everyone else is using a mouse and keyboard. And if you want to be competitive, you kind of have to. So unless I'm forced to, I'll use the controller. But I'm open to gaming with the keyboard if I need to.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, especially since since Twitch and online streaming has come around, you get a lot of chatters, and I always see every once in a while, it's like, oh, the PC people are here or whatever, and and the PC elitists or whatever. But I don't know. I don't really see it that way. It's just it's native to me. I do a ton of editing. Yes, I work from home as well most of the time, not all the time. But it's on a very different system. I have a work computer versus the computer I use everything else on. But aside from that, it's just, to me, that's the native form. I guess that's why I have an affinity for the mouse and keyboard set. But that being said, like I said, if I love a game enough, I will learn how to play it on a light pen or whatever. I will learn how to do it on that format if it means that I can actually play the game in the way it's intended. But yeah, I have, like I said, very recently, like this last year, this last 9 months, been doing a ton of stuff on controller. And I have a very basic Xbox controller. So this guy right here, probably the cheapest one you can get at Walmart. And it's been working great. I love it because it's something that can be plugged in, because I use my USB port for it. It's not a wireless or whatever, and it seems to be fairly fast in far as the connectivity and the reactions and all that other stuff. I always think mouse and keyboard is just a little bit faster though, but that's just me, because maybe I'm just more in tune with that. But is there a particular controller that you would advocate for, that you think has served you the best there, Com?
Yeah, I think the Xbox controller, which again I do have right next to me as well, I think that's as good as controllers got. I'm not saying there's not room for progress, I'm not saying we can't improve on it, but the PlayStation controller with those two analog sticks, which it's worth remembering that we were not hot on the analog sticks when they first came out. I think it's one of those very interesting moments, is something we see as so intrinsic to controller gaming nowadays. We reacted pretty badly to it because it suffered. I think the first game that required it, and the game that really became associated with those sticks, was Ape Escape. It's awkward as hell. I don't know if anyone's played it, but I believe you move your character with the left analog stick. You cannot move them with the D-pad. I think it was the first one. You character, left analog stick, camera, left D-pad, or D-pad, use your weapons and tools, right stick. It's so awkward. I don't have 3 thumbs. It's incredibly clumsy. And it really took a while before we actually became attached to them. And thank goodness we did. But I think the little change that the Xbox controller made, I'm just going to get the dust off so it's less embarrassing. The little change the Xbox controller made is having that stick up there. That slightly higher stick. Oh, on that left side is perfect. It's an incredibly well-balanced controller. They had a valiant first attempt with the first generation Xbox controller, but it was just a bit too big. When they scaled down, kept that stick up in the corner, I think that is as good as they got. There's another controller that I love, and I hope to talk about later. It didn't become my favorite controller just because of a few issues, but the Steam controller was a close second for a long time.
Yeah, I think that positioning of the left analog stick made a huge difference, because I remember playing on the original PlayStation, and you have that D-pad in what feels like the default position for your left thumb to rest. And then the analog stick you kind of have to stretch a little bit for. And this might feel like I'm complaining about the most minor inconvenience imaginable, but just the way that the the controller was constructed made me think the D-pad is the default control, and the analog stick is that kind of additional functionality that they've added on. And swapping those two made the analog stick the default control, and that I think is what really made the Xbox controller work. Because I agree completely with Com. When they first added those analog sticks on the PlayStation controllers, I was like, no, this sucks. And I don't know if I would have been open-minded enough to acknowledge that it did work if they had swapped those two. I might have still just been like, no, it's different and I hate change. Or I might have been like, yeah, this works because now I have analog controls and the discrete controls to supplement that. Whereas the other way, the discrete controls as the default didn't really give you as much functionality as you actually wanted.
I wonder if it would be possible in the modern day to make a big change to a controller like that, purely based upon how important the video gaming division is for these big companies. So for both Sony and Microsoft, it is an enormous part of what they are, and especially their identity. I think when you buy Sony products or you buy Microsoft products, I think a lot of their good name actually comes from a lot of their video gaming. That's where the heartfelt attachment to them comes from. You might think Microsoft make, whatever, a good Windows interface, but your heart isn't with Windows. Your heart's probably with Halo on the Xbox. And Sony might make pretty good TVs, do they? I don't know. But my heart is attached to their first-party video games. That's what I love about them. I wonder if they would take the risk nowadays of alienating fans by making a sort of quantum leap with controllers. Because that's what those sticks were. That was a huge difference. And the thing that makes me think is that maybe they wouldn't is, first of all, the Xbox controller has barely changed since that generation. And I don't think it really needs to. It's outstanding. The PlayStation controller has barely changed. We've added on that touchpad. But even then, most games don't really tend to worry too much about that unless it's the alternative menu button. And the only controller I can think of, and this might be my ignorance, in the last few years that really tried to do something different, was the Steam controller, made by a privately owned company that isn't publicly traded, therefore doesn't have its quarterly reports that they really have to make sure that they meet. So I wonder how much just business reality will stop those companies trying to truly change what they've done.
Yeah. I think if anybody were to, it would be Sony, because Sony does, even the first PlayStation, they knew they were going to kind of get into games. They weren't really fully committed to it, but they had everything in their pocket to be able to do that. And so I believe the lore on that is pretty deep. It's pretty interesting. But one of the things about Sony is that when they finally went full force with it, it was kind of odd because, again, they had all the tech behind them, but they didn't really know anything about gaming. So it's funny how, like, you see Sony in terms of like their gaming presence, they kind of stumbled into it, and they did well with what they did, obviously. But I think if anybody were to change the rules, because they are constantly putting out things that don't work really well, but they're trying. They always try to do new things. It's like the one thing that they do really well is the PlayStation. Everything else that they add into anything related to gaming tends to fail.
I really thought you were going to say if anybody were going to try to innovate, it would be Sony, because they clearly don't give a shit about pissing off their fan base. I mean, with a lot of the recent decisions you've seen from Sony, it doesn't seem like they get what people want or care at this point.
I've said it before, Sony hates money because there's so many titles that they could update. They just don't. They always and I could totally see the logic of it. It's like, look, it's not balanced. It's not meant for PC at this time. Let us create a proper port. But then when it comes out, a lot of times it's like it needs a day one patch. It needs a week one patch. It's just not good. It's leaking information everywhere. So that's never the reason. I've always just said, like, Sony just hates money. They truly, truly, truly believe that they'll make more money by putting things out on PlayStation first for 2, 3, 4 years before PC. And it's like,
I doubt that that's their motivation at all. Honestly, I think it is keeping the PlayStation as this unique entity that you need. I think it's as simple as that they will take that short-term hit on the game sales, which would go via Steam, for example, where Steam's going to take their cut, whatever it might be. they want to make sure people buy their console. And if that means that they have to forgo that money in this quarter, they'll take it in 8 quarters' time or 10 quarters' time, because you're probably still going to buy it anyway. In the way that people did just buy God of War when it came out. In the way that people, when Bloodborne does get that possible PC port, they'll buy it anyway. And I think that's where their real insistence is. They want you to have that hardware in your home. And they will forego some short-term gain to have that.
That used to be the business model, the idea that they would take a financial hit on the hardware itself, because once you owned that, you were more likely to make additional purchases for it.
Yeah.
So Microsoft and Sony both used to market their hardware at a price that lost them money per unit, and then make that money back because they had exclusive games for their console that you would either commit to buying because you owned that console already, or would motivate you to buy that console. So then you were kind of locked in as, an Xbox gamer or a PlayStation gamer, and you had to almost choose a side unless you were rich.
That's it. Yeah. And tell you that as well, you end up on your team, don't you? And you naturally gravitate towards those people on your side. I think that's really interesting about it being that lost leader, where you just decide that you're gonna throw out those consoles. Let's say they cost $500 to make, you're gonna sell it for $4, whatever it might be. And then I think for Sony, they still find a way to make that work. I know the 5 hasn't been a great success in comparison to previous consoles, especially because we're so far into its lifespan, which it doesn't feel like we are. It still feels like it's on the way in. But the PlayStation 4 at this point, I think we'd long since announced the PS5. But they do have incredible names as exclusive titles. If you think just of Spider-Man and Final Fantasy, right there. That's 2 huge audiences who will purchase what you put out. And if it's only on your console, they're in a very, very strong position. It's very consumer unfriendly. It's not a practice I like. But you can see the logic.
And I think that's the other part of it, is now they've deviated from that model of taking a loss on the hardware. So with recent hardware systems, they're just like, oh yeah, we've established this long kind of standing pick your side situation, and now we can take advantage of that to say that you picked your side. Now you have to pay whatever price we set on the hardware, so we don't have to take a loss anymore. And now people, I mean, you're seeing it with the pushback on the PS5 Pro. People are not happy with that, and they are correct. They shouldn't be happy with that. That is absolutely Sony in a position of power taking advantage of your lack of options. Sorry.
Well, I guess the only
That's
real
an email from Sony telling me to shut up.
Okay, shuts down.
Yeah.
I guess the only real counter thing, and I'm trying to think about how to phrase this, but games titles like Bloodborne, everybody's been asking that for years. I've been asking for years. It's probably the only Souls game that I would thoroughly play on PC for sure. But they haven't done it. There's who knows, or maybe there's a lot of legal issues with that or something, but that's something Sony could pay for and move on. But they just choose not to. And that's what I'm saying, is that's the caveat on the other side. They could do that. Nobody's buying a PlayStation 4 just for Bloodborne. It's not going to happen. They're going to buy it for all the other titles with it. The
only thing that I would add is I don't think it's really a caveat, because we're just saying we don't think it's a good practice. We think it's an ugly practice. The thing is, I think a PS4 game, so many copies of that console have been sold. So gosh darn many. It almost feels like, and especially at the price that you could get one for now, not you, but a lot of people around the world, if they wanted to play Bloodborne, they've really had a chance to play it. You don't have to drop the $500 to get the console now and the full price game. You could probably get it for double digits, I would imagine, especially secondhand, or from a friend who maybe has their old PS4, they've got the PS5, it's backwards compatible, so they just want to get rid of it. I just don't know how much interest there is anymore, really, in that Bloodborne remake. I want it, but interest from people who haven't played it, haven't been able to play it, would Sony see it as worthwhile? Again, I want them to do it. I want it to be out there. I just don't know how much it interests them.
I'm going to make a bold statement right now. If they were to put out a PC port, remaster or something like that for Bloodborne, it goes platinum. It sells.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So that's my point.
I think you'll have people who already
I think
own the
it
game
could.
buying it
Definitely.
Yeah.
If they put in the things that people want to see, like the 60 FPS,
Right.
update
Right.
the graphics, textures, etc., keep the experience the same,
Yeah.
it definitely could.
Yeah.
I'm just not convinced. I've got a horrible feeling it would be one of those surprise flops.
Yeah. It's who knows, right? This is
Exactly.
all speculative. It's just that I'm pretty. That's the only reason why I say Sony, I think, hates money, because they just are afraid to take that step. They really truly believe that making things portable loses them money somehow, and I just don't see that, because nobody's buying a PS4 for every single title that comes out like that. It's like they either have one or they don't at this point.
They're banking on their collection of titles they have,
Right, exactly.
to force you to do it. The thing is, they're very good at that. If the Final Fantasy crowd, they want to play Rebirth, they don't have a choice. The Spider-Man crowd, if they want to play Spider-Man, they don't have a choice. The God of War fandom, they got what they wanted eventually. But people like that so much that I'm not saying you'll buy a console for that, but you might buy it for that Rebirth and Spider-Man. You might buy it for the collection of titles they have. No, I do see what you mean. I'm just purely thinking about why they would be so cynical about it. Because again, it's a practice I don't like. I want these on other platforms sooner. I get the exclusivity thing, but from a purely consumer-friendly standpoint, I want to either see those on multi-platform availability immediately or quickly, not 3 years down the line.
Yeah, as a consumer, I mean, I have like kids, and it's easier for me to get the console for them than a full big rig gamer PC. I get it, but I have a full gamer rig PC and I want to play those titles.
Yeah. I was going to add one tiny point, by the way. When we said companies about not innovating, we didn't probably give Nintendo the credit they were due for the Switch. Yeah, they didn't change the way the controller really worked, but they did take a big risk on that. So at least there was that's interesting to see. Sorry, Banana, I cut you off.
Oh, no, that's fine. I think that's the Switch is a great example. I think Nintendo has always been pretty innovative with their control schemes and the consoles and the games that they make. Sometimes they take a big risk and it doesn't pan out. The Wii U was I believe a failure as a console. Very few comparatively items purchased. I love that system. I think that's an excellent system. I think there are a lot of wonderful games for the Wii U, and it's disappointing that it did so poorly for me, because I feel like I lost out on Nintendo investing in that system and developing games for that console. I think when it didn't succeed, they were like, we need to replace it with something better. And they did. They absolutely did with the Switch. I wanted more Wii U.
Wasn't the Wii U the first console that was Wi-Fi? I could be wrong, but
no, we definitely had Wi-Fi.
Oh,
I think
that's true.
I think even the PS Vita might have had Wi-Fi.
Vita.
Yeah, or the PSP, whatever it was. I can't
PSP.
remember which ones were which.
I had a PSP. I don't remember, but it did. It actually did. I remember that now. And
You definitely wouldn't be connected to the Ethernet every time, would you?
Yeah. The handheld systems, without a doubt, had to integrate Wi-Fi faster than other systems. Xbox 360 had the Wi-Fi adapter.
Correct.
So
I was just thinking of it.
A brick you could add on to this larger brick.
Bro, it was easier to run an Ethernet cable through my home than to get that fucking thing.
No, I definitely remember in college, like dragging Ethernet cables around door frames and like pinning them into the frame itself so that it was out of the way, but like very clearly looked like nobody had thought this through at all.
Well, speaking of analog, so I guess coming full circle, I know we went off on a tangent there, but on that analog stick, I think I don't remember my timeline correctly because, again, I wasn't a huge console person. But when Nintendo came out with its with its little analog stick on its controller, that was a complete failure. Everybody hated that. That made no sense whatsoever. Do you think that lended itself to when Sony and Microsoft integrated this, that it was like, oh, this is not going to work because we've already done this?
Well, I think the PlayStation DualShock controller had existed for quite a while before that. I think it was already semi-established. I don't know if really in the PS1 era, if it was ever really established as a necessity. I think there was still, we were using the D-pad a lot. But it was definitely already around. The controller that Nintendo made probably went some way towards reinforcing their idea that they were on the right path. You saw your opposition taking the idea, if I've got the timeline wrong, I'm sure someone will tell us, but you've got your idea, 2 analog sticks, being adopted by an opponent, being done with the 1 stick, failing, but there's some recognition that your idea has got some merit to it. And maybe in some way, the failure of that single stick version could have gone and helped reinforce the idea, no, the 2 stick has a future. And of course, with the PS2, it became as standard as where anything could be.
That may have been the biggest period of failure for Nintendo when it comes to the hardware stuff, because I believe if that's true about the timeline that Sony did have that first, then they failed on the controller, but also their system was more powerful than the Sony PlayStation. But because they insisted on using cartridges in their format, the little plastic cartridges, that always inhibited their ability for game developers to actually use the hardware that was inside the Nintendo machine. And so it was like this bottleneck. And so again, I think that was probably the biggest period of failure for Nintendo. They had everything for them. Everything was in front of them. They had the experience, they had the hardware, but they limited what developers could do. I
think there's quite a famous story about that's how they lost Final Fantasy VII, which went on to eventually be a PlayStation exclusive title because of the inability to put enough data on those discs. On the cartridges, but the CD offering so much more room. So you have, weirdly, because we were just saying a few minutes ago about the power of that branding of Final Fantasy, of God of War. We were very close to PlayStation not having that if Nintendo had just used CDs. It's a strange thought about how you have these little divergences where things that define what these companies are up until today could have very easily gone another way.
I think that period, I'm thinking kind of like the late 90s into the very early 2000s. You have the PlayStation introducing that DualShock controller with the analog sticks, and it not being a necessity overwhelmingly for PlayStation 1 games. And then Nintendo releases the N64, and that monstrosity of a controller still forced you to use the analog stick overwhelmingly. It was unintuitive to use anything on that controller, but you started to get used to the analog stick because it was your primary control on the N64 controller. And then that recognition that while the cartridges offer better load times, you have access to the data faster, you can't put as much on a cartridge, they move into the GameCube with mini discs. I have no idea why they went with mini discs, but it provided them that added game space. And you'll start to see those longer load times on Nintendo games because they're using the disc. But they're embracing that kind of advanced technology to put more into their games. And then they maintained a lot of the things that they did with the cartridges. So like you move into, Mario Sunshine, and it has that same repeat function that they used in Mario 64, where you're going back and replaying the same level and doing things just slightly differently to get a different result, because they've kind of established that formula, even though now there's more data that you can work with. You don't really need to do that anymore. It just becomes this kind of artifact of an older system that you are now building off of because you've done it before and it's familiar. So there's a lot in that time period of kind of game traditions and game kind of just established practices that got defined in that period for reasons that don't make a lot of sense. And now I think we have those lingering artifacts that tie back to those moments that didn't really make sense. And now we probably don't even think about them. We just accept that that's how things are.
And it's funny how recent all that was, but yet we kind of think of the gaming industry as this big mogul that is moving and shaking, with its will, our universe. but it's really funny that it's not that long ago that they were still feeling around for what works, what doesn't work. So it's pretty neat.
To a degree, we still are. It's such a young art form. It's incredible when you think about how enormous it is. I can't remember the statistics or if I've just made them up, but I'm sure there was something about how, which are my favorite kind of statistics.
Yeah.
The idea of gaming, I believe, being worth more than movies and music put together as an actual market of people buying things. It's a baby. It's a real baby, even in comparison to recorded music, which is a new art form. Recorded music. Even in regards to movies, which is a new art form. When you think about how long some art forms have been around, we're still figuring everything out. If anything, it's done incredibly well to become as established as it is with how many... what's the word for it? Let's go with traditions. I can't think of the exact word, but the language of video games that we've already established in such a short time amazes me.
Yeah. Don't worry, Com. There will be no fact checking in this episode, so don't.
I was about to say, can I drop that line?
So
I just imagine, somebody typing up a comment right now. Has there ever been fact checking in any of your episodes?
Yeah. We have never said that we're talking from a place of truth, but a pure opinion.
Yeah. Opinion and lies.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this.
And well, and on the other side of things, I know for me, as far as controllers go, I've already kind of mentioned where I struggle with controllers, but I didn't think they were bad controllers, except maybe the 360. But I really didn't really use that one, or so I don't really know. Not the 360, the Nintendo 3DS one. Is that what was the name of the controller, or what was the name of the system?
The N64.
N64. I'm sorry.
Okay,
N64.
I was gonna say the 3DS is
that's the stylus,
portable
isn't it?
console.
Yeah.
The Game Boy after
the
Game Boy Advance, I believe.
Yeah. Again, my memory not great, but for names especially. But no, the N64, that controller.
Yeah.
I've already talked about that, but I really didn't use it that much. That was something my kids used. But I would say that I did have a PSP, and I was excited about it because here I could play God of War because it had its own title. I could watch movies on it.
Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah, and I kind of thought, hey, look, this is actually very similar as far as control styles go to, even the Super Nintendo. There was a lot of very similar things about it. And I thought this should work great, but I didn't like it. And I didn't like it because it was so slippery. It was the buttons were like glassy. It looked aesthetically, it looked beautiful. It was great, but it was so slippery in a way. And I'm trying to do this and that. And I really wanted a little bit more flexibility, but it was so rigid and just a rectangle. It was like it's like a slim brick basically. So I really enjoyed what I could do on it, but playing games like God of War were tough. And it wasn't a hard game, but it made it hard because of the format.
I think there was a thing that we would never dream of doing now is when you play those, although Nintendo kind of did with the Switch, when you play those and you use the analog sticks are so small that you don't have that room to sensitively move them. If you think with an analog stick on the PlayStation or Xbox controller, you can give it this full range of motion as you decide on your walking speed. But those were so small that this was the limit right here. So as soon as you pushed in one direction, your character was flat out. And you didn't have that beautiful sensitivity that the analog stick offers you. At that point, you might as well have a D-pad. Which there were times with the PSP and even the PS Vita when I found myself thinking, I know you have to have the sticks. I know you do. I don't really know if you need them.
I remember playing as a young kid. I had a Game Boy and a Game Gear. And weirdly enough, the Game Gear, the layout of that system seems to have become the style of modern portable gaming. So things like the Switch, when you take it on the go, or the Steam Deck, that's what Game Gear was. It's laid out almost exactly the same, but Game Gear died. Game Gear failed to compete with the Game Boy and its iterations, which are not styled the same way until you get to the 3DS and you have that additional screen where it kind of forced you to put the screen in the center of your actual interface. It's funny for me to think that the Game Gear almost set the precedent of what a portable platform should be and then disappeared forever.
That reminds me of the GameCube oddly enough, which if I just saw the controller, it's been so long. It's basically the Xbox controller.
Mhm.
They did that with the thumb already, but the console, it didn't fail per se, but it definitely didn't win that generation.
Yeah.
But then you look at the competition. I think the two big things that came to mind was, I remember at one point, I think it was my brother wanted a DVD player. And I think at that time it was cheaper to buy the PS2 than it was to buy a DVD player.
Mhm.
And the PS2 was a DVD player, so wonderful. And by the time, and this could be my timeline being a bit cocked up, but I believe the PS2 had already been around for a little while before the GameCube came out. I think they weren't quite identical in their timeline, so it already had a chance to get that traction and to get its hooks into gamers.
Yeah, and I think the PS3 was the Blu-ray. Same thing.
Yes.
Same thing. Like a lot of why would I want to buy a Blu-ray player when I could just buy a PS3 and play games and watch movies? It's pretty good.
Oddly enough, my PS5, I plumped the extra little bit of cash for the Blu-ray player because it's the only way I can still play all the old DVDs that I have. And, most things nowadays are available online. Some things aren't. And now the PS5 remains my one gateway into DVDs and Blu-rays.
And so the next console that comes out with a VHS option, I'm all on board because I have all these VHSs.
That'd be beautiful. Well, while we're at it, let's get a fucking multi-tap connection so we can get a couple of controllers linked up.
A little
Memory cards.
The Sony PS VCR.
A little film projector. Yeah.
Well, do you remember a few years ago when you could buy, I think it was a Sega Genesis Mega Drive box, and you'd pay about €100 for it, and it was a replica of the old console with X amount of games they built into it. We do have a taste for the retro. I'm not saying the VHS could ever really find its way back, but there are things which shouldn't work and do. Gamers Advocate podcast VHS or VCR.
Yeah. You could buy the box set of our podcast on cassette and then not have any way to watch it.
It's funny looking at it in hindsight because you know how this Xbox is better or PlayStation's better, whatever. We almost had the same debate about beta versus VHS because beta was actually better resolution, but you couldn't find beta to save your life after a while. But VHS basically took over. It's one of those weird things where the inferior product won out. Crazy.
Well, yeah, that's another kind of general industry issue that I have where the way industries are structured and the way competition is structured within them, you can have an inferior product and win if you get to market faster, if your marketing is better, if any number of things play a role in the success. And it's rarely ever purely what is best that wins. It's not real competition in my mind. It's how do we bypass real competition and reframe it in a way that gives us the advantage? And I don't like that. I'm not a fan. I want the best system to win. I want the best format to become the default.
Capitalism, yay.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid saying that exact thought.
But this is the case very much with the Blu-ray HD DVD. There was never a war between those two formats. As soon as the PlayStation included that Blu-ray disc inside of it, a Blu-ray player, inside of it, it was over. There was never a war between those two formats. The closest we came to it was a war between the consoles. But HD DVD, also, just trying to pronounce the damn thing, probably didn't help. But the HD DVD player versus Blu-ray war never really took off as players.
And I think that was Philips/Sony tech. And that's why they put it in the PlayStation, I think.
Yeah. And then they didn't have to fight the war of whether the Blu-ray or the HD DVD was more important. Because they put it in their damn console. Mm-hmm. And now who thinks about HD DVD? I mean, to a degree, who thinks about Blu-ray? Yeah. Time moves on.
Remember Laserdisc? Laserdisc was...
Laserdisc, Betamax. Yeah, we can do this.
Yeah. But so clearly we have a hard time separating just talking about controllers without talking about the console system that it came with because they're intrinsically tied, obviously.
I feel like we're talking hardware more than we're talking controllers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I kind of mentioned the PSP as the probably one that I would have liked, but it's probably my least favorite controller because that's the one I was more familiar with as far as all the controllers I've played over the years. But is there any particular controller that you didn't like at all? or maybe the least?
Probably from never owning the console myself. It's not a controversial choice, but I never owned a Nintendo 64. So I only ever played it in very small quantities around friends' houses. To get used to that controller rapidly is damn near impossible. So that controller was my bane. I still don't know how you're supposed to hold it. I've got no idea. No one. I used to hold it like a jazz drummer, where you sort of like underneath it, like cradling it, because it was the only way I could make it work. So that controller, just for the sheer non-intuitive nature of it, which I think the other controllers have mostly managed to avoid. You pick up the Xbox controller, your thumbs land on the sticks. Mm-hmm. The Nintendo 64, not quite.
I think that was my biggest issue with the N64 is you almost had to adjust the way you were holding the controller depending on what you were trying to accomplish at the moment. And that's not how a controller is designed to work. You're not supposed to need to make huge adjustments in the middle of playing. It's supposed to be controls at your fingertips easily. That's the whole point. So the N64 for me stands out as probably the worst designed controller. Behind that, I'd say the original Xbox controller, just because it was... this is hopefully no longer the case, but we used to think of gaming as an industry for children. It was aimed at children. So to have the Xbox controller be this massive monstrosity that tiny little hands couldn't reach around felt like a huge miss, because you're supposed to be marketing this to children. And I think if I were to pick up the original Xbox controller now, I would be like, this is still too large, and I'm in my 30s. When I was 12 playing this was massively over the top too large.
Yeah, I've got quite big hands, not enormous. I've got quite big hands, and honestly, it's fatiguing after a while. You don't want to play more than an hour or two, just because at that point your thumb's a bit sore, and at the back of your hands you've been in this weird clenched position the entire time, and that's what these other controllers have really succeeded in. Is you almost don't notice after a while you're holding the damn thing, and you can, as we all know, sit there for 10 hours and play.
You did just remind me of the other failure. And it's much less significant, of the N64 controller. The analog stick was pure plastic, hard, rigid plastic. And if anybody remembers playing like a Mario Party game, there's a lot of times where you put that rigid plastic analog stick in the palm of your hand and circle it around until you don't have skin on your hand anymore, because it was this hard, rigid plastic. And then you go to like the analog sticks on a PlayStation controller, and they have this kind of gentle rubber casing around them that would almost always wear away if you played as much as I did when I was a kid. But it started in a way that wouldn't tear your hand apart from playing the game.
Hey,
that was another huge miss on Nintendo's part.
Yeah, and when you think about that, like, you don't want to be locked away in your room all day, so suddenly come downstairs with blisters on your palms that you can't explain.
Yes.
Yeah, I had mentioned on the Xbox that I have the cheapest one that I got from that I could find that I really like, but I mean, maybe it was $30, but they have some that with the analog stick, have some strong magnets, so you can actually replace them and just pop on a different one. So those are pretty neat.
I do really like the Xbox Elite controllers. They're crazy expensive. I think they're tremendously overpriced. Especially given that you will run into hardware issues with people typically call them, ghosts in the controller, where you'll have stick drift or something along those lines. That is an inevitability with Microsoft controllers in my mind. They will eventually fail in that way, and there's no fix. It's replace a circuit board internally, which is a huge pain in the ass, or replace the controller overall, which is crazy expensive. But the Elite controller does offer those paddles on the back, so it adds additional controls for you to get used to, and then you have that additional layer of control over what you're trying to do. And the controller itself, the kind of replaceability, the modularity of the controller to, I don't like this analog stick, I'm going to replace it with a different cap that feels a little more intuitive to me, or just a little more comfortable. I think they did that really well. It's the actual circuitry not so much.
It's a strange one, because I've heard this before, so I know it's not just you by any stretch, but I've never had one of my Microsoft controllers drift. And I had my Xbox 360 for about 10 years, and it never went. I was always using the same one. This controller's about 5 years old, no problem at all. My Switch ones, I had to replace.
Mhm.
Like, they are gone. I didn't have them for too long, probably about 2-3 years. But this is pure luck. Like, I don't take care of it particularly. I don't get in there and dust it out. Pure luck, I haven't had that problem. Touch wood. I've got no wood around me.
I think I've had 8 Xbox controllers develop that drift over the course of my consoles, and had to replace the controller, which is why I think it's so infuriating. It's Xbox controller prices don't really ever drop if you want the OEM, the Microsoft brand. If you want an off-brand one, you'll probably run into other issues, but the price is more reasonable. But for me, buying the official Microsoft product and then having it fail in a way that felt way too familiar after the 4th one did it was so infuriating. It was like, can you please do better with the hardware so this doesn't become an issue and I don't need to replace something every couple of years? This is infuriating.
Well, there goes our Microsoft sponsorship, but
fuck 'em.
No, love me. Love me. I wanted to, if I can, pull us into a slightly different topic. It's in the same family, but I did want to pull us there and see what
We've never done that before.
Yeah, but if I do by asking, it feels like it's supposed to be happening.
That's our brand, chaos by nature. So
hashtag no segues. Now, the problem I have with controllers, so bear with me because it might end up being quite a long thought, is I don't think we have controllers, when we look at Microsoft and keyboard and classic video game controllers, that appeal to new adult gamers. Now, if you're a new adult gamer and you've not grown up playing video games, now I've had a few friends who have been in this situation. They just didn't have games as a kid, they never got into it. Think how natural it is when you pick up a controller and you're plopped down into the world. You can probably guess left analog stick means go forward, right analog stick means orbit the camera, the left bumper probably does the same thing as always, the grenades or whatever, right triggers probably shoot. Games will normally explain this to you, but very quickly. It'll just be push RT to shoot. If you haven't ever played a video game before, if you haven't used a controller, it is almost impossible to get used to that out of nowhere, because it's very unintuitive and we've just become used to it. So I have had people trying to play games for the first time who cannot get their head, particularly around the right stick. That idea of being able to orbit the camera is absolutely alien to them. So I think there is a degree to which they gatekeep gaming. If you're a new adult coming into it, you're not prepared for the frustration. When you're a kid, you'll accept the frustration. It's a part of life. It just is, and you're used to it. When you're an adult, you just want to have some fun. It's not very welcoming. The keyboard, I think, is worse. You might have gotten used to a keyboard and done some typing and so forth. You can probably touch type. That House of the Dead game, no problem. But if you're trying to game for the first time and someone says WASD, and that's going to be your controller basis, what the hell does that mean? All of a sudden now you're doing control and pushing buttons at the same time, or you've got to get up and hit the F bar. It's very, very unwelcoming. And when we think about how the fact that we occasionally just add on complications, one of my favorite controllers was the Steam controller. It's got paddles on the back. Think about trying to get used to that. Now you've got paddles as well, and the sticks aren't sticks, or not all of them. Some of them are touchpads. And it's for customization. It's for gamers. It's not for someone new to it. I think it's a real shame that we've seen a decline in those controllers that anyone can play with. And I'm thinking of a few ones in particular. I'm thinking of the Nintendo Wii controller, which gave me memories of video gaming with my granddad that I would not have gotten otherwise. That was never going to happen. He fell over doing Wii bowling. It was very funny when we realized nothing was broken. The steering wheel for Truck Simulator, or for, I've forgotten the name of that race, iRacing, those games. The light gun, if you think back to Time Crisis and House of the Dead. Just arcade controllers generally, and I think we have overlooked something, and this is because of who we are and the kind of gaming we've done and the kind of gaming we don't. There are a lot of people who don't game with any of these, they game on touchscreens. Mm-hmm. If you think of people playing the Candy Crush games and the, what do they call it? This will age just very quickly. The Fruit Ninja. That's the one I remember. But this exclusively tablety and telephone touchscreen games. I wonder how many people play exclusively on those and how that compares to controllers and mouse and keyboards. I think they might outnumber us.
They do.
I think
they do.
Yeah.
Mobile gaming is the largest subcategory of gaming at this point.
It's not even
although
close.
I would say,
It's like by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, when you think of the 3 in a row games and so forth, that's...
Yeah. I think that is where I kind of get a little lost is, you have mobile gaming as this overwhelmingly dominant aspect of gaming. And to us, we don't even think about it that much because of what mobile gaming focuses on. So overwhelmingly, mobile gaming focuses on what we would see as mini games in the games we play. There aren't too many RPGs that work on a mobile platform. It's mostly for that kind of quick puzzle game or, time waster that's, not super engaging. So when I think of gaming, I don't think of the mobile platform for that reason, because I feel like as much as it is a subcategory, it's almost completely separate from what I think of as gaming. I don't have any favorite games that are on mobile. I'd much rather play them somewhere else because that touchscreen interface is very limiting. And I think that's kind of what we were getting into at the very beginning when I said it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish as far as what is the most appropriate control interface for that. And mobile gaming has probably the most customizable interface in that touchscreen. There's so many different ways you can go with that. None of them feel good to me. And it might just be that inertia to say that, like, I've gone through the evolution of a gaming controller. I remember playing with that boxy Nintendo Entertainment System controller that was for children, very small. Then they progressively upgraded. So, an additional 2 buttons with X and Y when they went to Super Nintendo, the shoulder buttons with R and L, and then the analog sticks and the kind of gradual progression. And I think for somebody who started gaming on that very simple controller and then experienced the evolution, I don't have that difficulty with the intuition of picking up a controller the way that Tom was saying, that I'm not coming into it blind. I have years of experience and I recognize that progression. So like I was there when it was very simple and intuitive. I had a handful of buttons, super quick to figure out what each of them did. And then as you add that complexity, it becomes a little less intuitive to figure out what it is you're doing. But game developers recognize that, like, now we have additional ways of giving our player control and features within the game. If we attempt to kind of standardize those, it becomes even more intuitive for them. And that's why we have that, left analog stick is movement, right analog stick is typically camera. And, overwhelmingly you'll find games where like A is jump because it's right there. Feels intuitive that that's where that button should be. And then you get to a game where A is not jump and you're like, the fuck is this? This is nonsense. It's very much that kind of inertial progression where we're like, this is how it was. If we're upgrading or changing anything, it should be a minor deviation. So for somebody to step into the finished product without that progression in their memory, I absolutely understand them being like, this doesn't make any sense. Whereas to me, it's like, this makes perfect sense because for 25 years, I've been learning this. Whereas you've had 8 seconds. Why don't you understand it?
The thing that concerns me about that is, could that harm the future of the games that we like? We are around for quite a long time. We've got a while to go. Our generation has a while to go. But the kind of games that we like are on console, for example, rather than on PC. They're designed to be played with either keyboard and mouse or controller. They're designed to be these long immersive gaming sessions where you duck in for 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever the case may be. And there is such a clear distinction between what games are on phones or tablets and what games are on computers that I wonder if that divide between them might actually see a winner and a loser in the very, very long term, where you will see traditional video gaming, and in the sense that we look at it, being really pushed to the margins and not being treated with the respect that we would like it to deserve. by the creators. And we might end up seeing in 30, 40, 50 years RPGs going out the window and becoming a very, very niche topic. Adventure games becoming a very niche topic. And I guess the easiest way to look at something like that in the modern day is look at the development, or look at the progression, of Konami, who pull away from those titles like Metal Gear Solid that they held, like Silent Hill that they held, and they invest so much in their, I've forgotten the name of the machines.
Pachinko?
I think it's that, yes. And you've seen them, a big traditional publisher, move towards that. And I wonder if that possibly spells danger for the kind of gaming we like. Again, not in the short term.
Yeah.
But in the long term.
I mean, that is definitely always possible. It just has, as long as, companies have a profit margin that they have to keep in check, there's always going to be some questioning of that. And, I'm not going to hold a company, responsible because, hey, look, they were worried about the profits, because even the more recent game like Final Fantasy that came out, the remaster for Final Fantasy VII, it didn't reach their target numbers. So it sold a lot, but it didn't reach the numbers they thought. So that's kind of what I'm saying is you have to.
If only they didn't make it a console exclusive. They could have sold it to a wider audience.
Who'd have thunk?
I can tell you it was the reason I bought that PS5.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely considered getting a console for those games, and now I just don't have those games.
Yeah.
And as frustrating as it is to not have that experience with, one of my favorite games and the remake they built from it, I still think it was the right decision, because fuck you. Stop trying to control me.
Yeah. And that is their problem is you will get over it. Like, it'll be very annoying for a week when the game comes out and you think, oh, I wish I was playing it. It'll be a little annoying for a month or two as you think, oh, that would be nice. But then 2 months later, a new game comes out. Mm-hmm. And then you'll play that instead. And you'll move on. And you won't forget about it. But that burn won't be there anymore.
Well, I think the game changer for a lot of that, to kind of answer what Banana was saying with the with that issue, and then what you're bringing up, Com, is accessibility. And so any developer or producer like Sony or whoever brings in more accessibility, and I think what you were saying, Com, was not making things so complex, making things more accessible and user friendly. There's a lot of things that seem to be in the pipeline for a lot of engineering stuff. Like I saw something very recently that MIT did with a table that would move with the person approaching. It recognized who was there, and it would lift up things from the table to for you to reach out on. And if you wanted to, like, say, put your tablet on the table, it would keep a tilt for you, and it would go back down to a flat surface when you left. It was pretty amazing. So there's a lot of things that are like for people who are not able to use their hands for gaming. So it's an eye focused only thing. So they can like play the game using what they're looking at. You have, I had a discussion, and this is going to sound like I'm going off topic, but I'm going to come back here. But I had a discussion with somebody like,
never. We'll be the judge of that.
Well, yeah. And so rein me in, please, if I don't come back. But
I'll just talk over you at that point.
Well, they were trying to convince me that film it was better than, say, the books. I'm like, no. I mean, it can be a great movie, but you'll never convince me that literature is an inferior form of media than film, where let's say made for TV or a movie or whatever from the literature. Now, even if the literature itself wasn't that great, because I keep coming back to the mind's eye and stuff, but the thing is that with literature, if you can't see, that film is possibly lost on that person, right? If you're blind, you can't see it. If you're deaf, you won't be able to hear, what's coming from you only see images. With literature, there's all these workarounds. There's languages like Braille, for instance. If it can be an audio of the book if you needed to. So my point here is that there's always ways that literature can get that media to you. And I'm talking about accessibility. So if those companies are able to kind of integrate accessibility, that's the game changer. And that's where we start looking at like, what's the next generation? We'll make it accessible for everybody. And so when we talk about things like mobile platforms, yes, that's the easiest thing to do, and possibly losing some of those genres because of the format that took over. It comes back to accessibility. How can you make this type of game or this type of whatever accessible? I think whoever does that better is probably going to be the one who moves and shakes those type of titles going forward.
I think that kind of creates this. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Con.
No, you go. I talked for a while. It's okay.
I think that kind of creates this interesting idea where gaming can be this huge motivator in terms of, we think of gaming as kind of like a leisure activity, but it can be this huge motivator in terms of technology development for human-machine interfaces, to the point that we can make a video game that inspires people to develop these accessibility features, these things that allow this game to become accessible for everyone so that they can all share in that experience. And we end up developing just objectively beneficial technology that could be applied to tremendous other activities, basically because people wanted to share like an experience in a video game or a movie or something along those lines with people who did not have the accessibility to enjoy that experience. And I think that's pretty amazing. And it is also, on the counter side, a little frustrating that we fall into these kind of traditions within gaming that we've been talking about with, the controller. We think of a lot of things as just being the way that controllers have progressed. We don't see video game developers investing in these alternative interfaces too frequently, because for video game developers, it's a huge risk. When people make those accessibility features their sole business, and they look at the other avenues, the other applications that their new technology can be used for, it makes it make a little more sense. But it does seem a little disappointing that you have people on the outside of the industry making improvements for video game developers because they refuse to. It's a little disheartening to think that like we have these pillars of the gaming industry who will not invest in these other options. It falls to others who don't already have that success, who can't leverage their existing resources to make these improvements. It's a little disappointing to think that like Sony doesn't care. They just want their games to succeed and they'll stick to the formula. Whereas, we need somebody taking a huge risk, basically devoting their life savings to building a business that objectively has a good goal, might not succeed based on, marketability.
It's actually one thing I'm really, really hope that we tackle in another episode with other people as well is accessibility in gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And how people who maybe would struggle with traditional gaming find their way in and how they can adapt. And that was just one small thing for controllers. So it's not really part of anything that I like with the studies that I'm doing now, but I do occasionally have to do video game classes. Unsurprisingly, it's the worst. It's awful. But we talk about accessibility in video games more than I think many generations might have done. It comes up very, very often, which I'm really happy about. And a big thing that I've learned about video gaming is the importance of controller, just to bring it back to that briefly, controllers in a video game and making a game controller mappable, is that is a very, very easy leap from there to adaptive controllers. For people who might not be able to use a traditional controller, if you can give them the option then to remap those controls, it can almost always be adapted to these alternative methods of controlling it. Whereas a game that is exclusively for mouse and keyboard with all that it requires, you might not be able to make that as easy to adapt to. I don't know what the word is. Is adaptive controller a word? That sounds like it means something else. Non-traditional controllers.
Yeah, I think we are all on the same page of what we want and what you're talking about, Com. I don't think the word exists because the tech technically doesn't exist yet. It doesn't form to my hand.
There are these controllers for people who can't use traditional controllers. They do already exist.
Right.
They just maybe aren't as common. we're not so familiar with them and not familiar enough with the language to talk about them properly, which is something that we should amend.
Yeah, I think that's another reason we probably haven't dug into the accessibility topic too much, is the three of us don't have the best perspective to offer insight on that, with the fact that nobody really needs to make a ton of accessibility features for the three of us. Maybe a colorblind mode.
But even then, you can get by if there isn't one with the kind that I've got. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. We recognize the importance. We can't really speak to it because it doesn't impact us directly.
I was a very competitive RTS player back in the day. You know, Warcraft and Starcraft and Age of Empires. I was actually a pretty high ranked player. And one thing for me when it came to mouse and keyboard stuff, because I mean, again, that was my thing. I struggled a bit with getting a great mouse. Back in the day, of course, with Diablo, you did all these clicks with your left click, and they actually advertised saying, good for 1 million clicks on Diablo, because you're constantly clicking. But what I found, I use this like optical orbital one. And the thing is, the reason why I did that is because I could put the sensitivity on super high. And if I'm on an RTS map, I could just be there. I wouldn't have to move my wrist at all. It was infinitely faster. And so a lot of people like me who did that back in the day did that. And so to this day, I still use these optical mice like that, the trackballs. They're called trackballs. And to me, that has always been the superior one. But I am so in the minority of that because I come from a generation that a very niche group that found that being so much more useful than other forms of mice. But yeah, so a traditional mouse for me is not actually a good mouse. And so when we're talking about like good and bad forms of types of, you know, controllers, if I'm using a mouse, it's always going to be one of these trackballs. But again, I'm in the minority, and so it's one of those, like, I always advocate it. It's like, hey, look, if you like RTSs, give it a shot. You might like it more than you think. But a lot of times it's advertised as like just reduces wrist strain. But
I think that's one of those situations that I probably didn't consider initially, but does play into the initial point I tried to make, which is what you're trying to accomplish dictates what the most appropriate control scheme is. So in an RTS, that trackball mouse works really well. In a first-person shooter, I'm not so sure that it does. I have what is, oh boy, a kind of more traditional mouse with the additional 12 buttons on the side. That works really well for, I would say, like MMOs, something where you've mapped an ability to each of those 12 buttons on the side. And I'm not going to pick up my mouse again because I messed up a bunch of shit doing that. But if you noticed on the top, there were 3 lights lit up, which means that my mouse is currently configured at the 3rd out of 4 sensitivity levels. Being able to jump between discrete DPI settings with my mouse has proved hugely beneficial for me in shooters. So I've been playing the First Descendant a bit recently, and that's one of those games where just navigating the world, I max out mouse sensitivity, but as soon as I enter combat, I drop it down a level, mostly because I'm not a competitive shooter player. I don't do that regularly. So my ability to process precision controls at that highest DPI setting, it's not there. I need it slowed down a little bit. Having that dynamic setting where I can just jump to a slightly lower DPI setting that feels more intuitive is wonderful. Probably not necessary in non-shooter games. I don't need that in an RTS. I don't need that in a platformer at all because mouse sensitivity means nothing in a platformer. Yeah. So I think it really does kind of lean into that. Almost each game needs to consider what the gameplay is like and then what the best version of the controls are and lean into that. Sometimes it's going to be a controller. Trying to play Dark Souls on a mouse and keyboard. I mean, knowing that there are challenge runners out there who are like, I'm going to play Dark Souls on a harp. Shut up. So, I have enough trouble playing it on a mouse and keyboard. It's a controller-focused game. You can excel if you get used to another version of controllers, but I think for developers, they're thinking about what is the easiest for their players to get used to. And for Dark Souls, that's a controller for me. For RTSs, that's Legion's trackball. For first-person shooters, this dynamic DPI setting on my mouse, most appropriate thing I can think of.
Now, I just want to be the podcast for everyone because I want people to feel like, they can be involved too. I remember when I was getting back into PC gaming, one of the most annoying things I found was people online telling me what hardware I should have. This isn't aimed at you. This was when I was first starting. I just wanted to get a simple laptop to do some gaming on. So I'm going to show you, in the interest of open disclosure, my gaming mouse, which is this piece of office shit, which has no extra buttons, which has got a stain on it because I took it from someone. The main advertising point on the box is silent buttons and rubberized scroll wheel. And you can still game with this. Okay? Your mouse will not stop you also being shit at Call of Duty. You can do it too if you've got one of these. It's okay to have a crap mouse.
Yeah. I will say for editing, like when I'm like recording a scene or something, I have to go to my controller. So what was that?
Sorry, I thought you were going to say in editing, I will be removing all of that.
Yeah, well, I might, but yeah.
Don't take that out. That's my appeal to the masses.
No, I actually because
just add a little timestamp that says mystery stain for this section.
Yeah, because even if I reduce the sensitivity on the trackball for recording purposes, it's still it's the human error. Like I'm just moving the mouse, and it's just not smooth.
Who told you my nickname?
But I think that's the counterpoint to what I was saying with the Dark Souls and people playing on a harp or whatever. If you lean into it, if you embrace the controller that might not be the most appropriate interface for these controls, you can still excel. So Com, with his very simplistic mouse, can still be a better first-person shooter player than me with my dynamic DPI settings, because maybe Com just enjoys shooters more and practices and is actually good at video games. It's possible for you to overcome these obstacles with controllers and your interface. It's just almost a matter of, do you want players overcoming an obstacle right out the gate? Or do you want to give them the easiest interface for these controls?
Sure. I mean, you can try to challenge me for an Age of Empires with your mouse, but you're not going to get out of the Stone Age with me, so...
I'm really good at Age of Empires.
There you go.
I'm super good at cheating at Age of Empires.
Hacks, baby.
Yeah. Hacks. Yeah. Now we'll go into we can go into tactics for some of these RTSs sometime in the future. That'll be a podcast episode. Well,
it'll be a podcast episode that I don't participate in.
Well, there you go. It would be one that if Banana can't make it for some reason, me and Com can reminisce.
I mean, I played StarCraft and Warcraft. Well, I had my own little, I'm not well known, but my own little reputation on Warcraft 3. But it was those custom maps. It was not the traditional Warcraft gameplay.
I don't talk trash. But for me, RTSs
just did.
Yeah, no,
just did.
No. But like RTSs.
No fact checking.
Yeah. No, if it's kind of like those people who like golf. They're like, I don't go golfing. I play golf. That's how RTSs are with me. I don't play RTSs. I just win them. So.
I just love that nobody's actually challenging you on any of this. You're just bragging for no reason. Com and I don't care.
Oh, you'll care.
We're not even committing to playing these games with you.
It's not even installed.
All right, that's it. This next weekend, me and y'all
join our next live stream
on the live stream.
Legion picks a fight with us.
Whilst I'm playing XCOM.
Yeah.
I sent Com a game that I have. It's Alien Dark Descent or something, but I was surprised how much like XCOM. I forgot that I had it. I was like, this is kind of like. I thought about streaming that for October, but I was surprised how much like XCOM it was, because I saw Com playing. I was like, wait a minute, I remember a lot of this stuff, and yeah,
I played this before.
Yeah, because I don't have XCOM. I always associate
that is massively discounted right now. By the way, it's like $4.
It's $3.
$3, fucking hell.
Too rich for my blood.
Yeah,
Got a mortgage.
it's funny. I'd always thought of
I have to buy treats for Kiki.
You don't want Kiki to have treats.
Fuck you, XCOM.
not at the point when Com was playing it, but like for several years, I always thought of XCOM kind of similar to like Galactic Civilizations, one of those turn-based, but you can kind of like make your own ships and things like that. I always, for some reason, thought XCOM was more like that.
The original one does have more of like the base building mechanics, and you do have to maintain your air fleet, but not to that depth. It's still the meat and potatoes of the game is still the strategy layer for the battle.
Okay, let me see how far we've gotten. Almost 2 hours of just talking, but really,
We definitely started
like
before.
8 minutes of
Of
actual
content,
relevant conversation.
hour and a half of content.
It's like 95 minutes of Legion bragging about fucking StarCraft.
I would have. It was funny because when you said like I'm gonna edit out all this fluff, I was really hoping you were just gonna lead into it and go into the intro again, as if we needed to restart the episode.
Welcome to the Gamer's Advocate. Well, a RTS legend and 2 other guys, but
Yeah, RTS legend that no one's ever
Tell us your
heard
story,
of.
Banana.
I guess, well, I mean, there's definitely a lot here. We could probably go over this some more at a future date, but thanks for joining us.
I think this topic leans into other topics super easily,
Yeah.
like accessibility as the big one that's super obvious.
Appreciate everybody being here. And if you liked the episode, please give it a like. Comments are always greatly appreciated. They really help push the algorithm. We have a Discord. Join the Discord. Tell us about topics that you may want to see, or just tell us who's your favorite commentary person. Commentator, whoever, Banana, and me. We steal each other's fan base all the time. So, yeah.
I have a fan base.
Yeah. I stole one of them.
I thought it was just Cobb's one friend.
There you go.
Don't word it that way.
yeah, Cobb's only friend.
And then now they like you more.
Com's only fan? What?
Keeps the lights on.
There you go. Well, we will check you guys later. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.